If you want to look at the slides so that you can see some more images, which I hid away to save time, then you can go to this link. This is the first time in my life, I think, when I ever cited Neary in any talk which I gave. And this is a sort of apology. So for some 15 years, he was annoyingly persistent in talking about images and mobile phones and pictures and trying to convince me that I should stop being so one-dimensionally interested in linear text, logical, linear symbolism, and so forth. So I'm quoting from his Wikipedia page. I don't have time to read lots of his papers anymore. So on the Wikipedia page it says, devices that transmit multimedia messages that can contain speech, but also images and sounds that describe states of affairs with a richness not found before. And this is supposed to be the basis for a deep new insight on Wittgenstein. And I agree. I confess I was wrong. He was right. But he was only right about one small fraction of images, diagrams, multimedia, and so forth. So he talks, or anyway, the Wikipedia page talks about describing. Describing is interesting, but it's only one part of the way in which diagrams play a role in all the important things in life. So we all remember that the speech act theorists distinguished between different ways in which we can do things with words. So we can describe. That's one way in which we can do things with words. But we can also give commands or requests or make promises, or we can marry people or promote people or testify and so forth. So these are three other interesting ways in which we can do things with words. Now there are also three other interesting ways in which we can do things with not words, but something bigger, which we can call a document, which includes a multimedia document. Primarily, I will be focusing on those documents which contain diagrams. So we can describe using diagrams in a chemical diagram. We can try to get people to do things using diagrams, for instance, using an architectural blueprint or a wiring diagram. Or we can commit ourselves to doing things by signing a contract or by creating a flowchart for our activities in the next 3 weeks. And we can bring about changes in the world by signing a diagram or signing a document or stamping a serial number on an object and so forth. Now, I think that those four things, and especially the three lower things, are the key to almost everything which is important in human experience. For instance, you can get a PhD certificate. I'm not saying that's important, but this is illustrative of something. Now, there are differences. So there are speech acts, which people talk about, usually about description acts, statements, assertions, reasoning. That's what we've been talking about most of the day. And then there are document acts. And document acts, as Neary also recognized in his earlier writings on Ong and so forth, they can endure. They can serve as a storehouse of memories. They can endure into the future so that they can serve as a storehouse of plans and thereby commit ourselves to doing things in the future, including having things done when we are dead. And many documents incorporate diagrams, such as maps, for instance, when we document property rights that we have over a piece of real estate. And or documents which we sign and give to the bank when the bank gives us a mortgage. So the mortgage gets to keep the title deed. The bank gets to keep the title deed until we pay off the mortgage, and thereby the bank aggregates one document, the title deed, with the map in the bank vaults with other documents in which we testify or agree that we will pay back the mortgage in installments in a certain way. Now, this aggregation of documents is also crucial to almost all the important things in human existence today. Now, this is a very simple diagrammatic document. It's an instruction, a diagrammatic instruction for making miso soup. This is very boring, although soup may be an important thing in human life. This is another slightly more interesting document. Just shows you how hard it is to find this place if you live in the professor's house. This is probably the way we walked. Now, this is a map, which is also a plan. So we wouldn't plan, if we saw this map, we wouldn't plan to follow it, but other things being equal. This is a plan, but once we've actually walked, it becomes a record of what we did. So it becomes a record of our journey. So in this way, I'll screw it down. What begins as a plan ends as a record. So we move from the second kind of speech act or document act to the first kind, the describing kind. And similarly with the blueprint, if you have a blueprint to build a building, then you start with a plan, you follow the plan, and when you've built the building, then the blueprint is now a record, both of the product, because it tells you what you built and how its structure is, but also of the process of building, because the document which contains the blueprint will be aggregated with all kinds of other documents and signatures and signs and stamps, which tell you the various stages of building, most of which, or some of which, will be administrative stages as different aspects of the building get approval from different local building authorities. Also, you're going to need to have a document in which you order the building of the building. You're going to need to have another document in which you sign off that the building is finished and so on. So you will gradually aggregate a meshed collection of documents which map the process of building the building, which is not just building, it's also documenting and approving and testifying and so forth. Now, buildings are quite important parts of human existence. And most of the interesting ones do this. And of course, a document, it's going to get modified along the way. When you discover different things going wrong, or different kinds of materials are no longer made, different rules are changed about what you can build and so forth. So every good plan has to be modified. And this is another way in which documents get aggregated with other documents as the plans change. Now, complex processes like this will only be possible with many, many aggregated documents which are coordinated to each other in very, very precise ways. So ambitious architectural projects involve ambitiously, horizontally and vertically intermeshed document aggregates. And they can be built, they can be created only on the basis of such document aggregates, which start off as plans and become records. This is the D-Day landing. Now, it's been calculated that there were 4,600,000 documents which were created during the planning process for the D-Day landing. It was a very complicated process, which required a lot of very complicated coordination. That coordination was made possible by many, many horizontally and vertically intermeshed documents. Now, the Shang dynasty, well, they invented writing, I guess. I didn't ask people before 1600 BC, but they also invented the first serious military operations. You can have serious organized military, serious standing army only if you have documents, so you have to have writing. Writing was very important to the Shang dynasty because military combat was very important and they needed to do it on a very ambitious scale. So you can wage a large military campaign only if you have writing. Now, if anyone knows of examples of military campaigns with organized military before writing, I would be very interested. So this is a kind of hypothesis. Genghis Khan had a mail system which he used in order to wage his commands. And he had spies who went out drawing maps and sending them back on the mail system so that the wards could be planned more effectively. So again, this is a case where a very interesting aspect of human experience, defending yourself against the bad guys, is possible only because of many horizontally and vertically intermeshed documents. Now, there are some philosophers, Wittgenstein probably not, but Searle and Tuomela and Margaret Gilbert and Michael Bratman, who talk about collective action. So they've developed a philosophy of collective action, which I think is very interesting, but it's almost exclusively focused on tiny, local, interpersonal exchange between cooperating agents who all know what each other want and they agree. So, shall we go for dinner this evening? I say, and you say yes. So I'm too tired. But that would be an example of the sort of cooperative, agreement-based action which Michael Bratman, for instance, is focusing his work on. Now, all of the interesting aspects of human existence are not small, local, face-to-face, cooperative, agreement-based. They are based upon the fact that people work in or for large organizations. Some of them are alienated from those large organizations. They just do it for money. They don't share the intentions. They make a kind of deal. And they're always looking for ways of being somewhat lazier than the deal requires. So they do not intend to realize the goals of the organization. Rather, they intend to fit in and make do, and the organization takes account of that. It harnesses their activity in order to fulfill its objectives, but it doesn't do that on the basis of their agreement. So Adam Smith made a point about this, that you will get the best results if you do not assume that everybody is out for the good of the community. Now, Scott Shapiro, who is a philosopher of law at Yale University, opened my eyes to the importance of massively shared agency. He amends the Michael Bratman theory of social agency to give a theory of what law is, but which is completely general. It can be applied to all kinds of large-scale, human, organized activity. And Shapiro's idea is that what we need to do is to add authority to what Bratman and co. said. So he says authorities are mesh-creating mechanisms which can, for instance, solve problems which arise when disputes arise between members of organizations. So they can recreate the mesh between the activities of the members of organizations so that the subplans which those members of the organizations are required by the organization to realize are once again being realized. So authorities come in and break up disputes. They settle disputes. If necessary, by throwing people out of the organization. I think this is obviously right, that massively shared agency presupposes authority, and that mesh creation by means of authority is indispensable to any large-scale activity. For instance, in the military. So you can't run a large-scale military organization without modules which are hierarchically organized with authority relations going down, with horses carrying maps and messages from the top to the bottom, telling the people at the front what they have to do. This is the Dutch army, which is very cleanly colorful. But all of these images belong to standard military symbology. So practically everything which is important to a military plan is captured in terms of standard symbols like this. Now, obviously, Shapiro is right, but he's only a little bit right, because those signals from the authorities which hold the organization together cannot be spoken symbols. And if the organization looks like this, then you need to have some way of communicating by appropriately meshing vehicles in order that the orders get to the right people through the appropriate stages of suborders and suborders to get down to the subplans and the sub-subplans and so on. Now, authority alone won't do that for you. You have to have a vehicle for meshing. So if authority is a technology for meshing of plans, then you need a vehicle for that technology, which is documents. So it's documents which hold together horizontally and vertically meshed hierarchies. So it's documents which establish the vertical authority relations in the first place. It's documents which make the kernel a kernel. Documents create obligations. Sometimes you do it by raising your hand and swearing, but you're going to have to sign a lot of documents too. Documents will establish horizontal coordination. But most importantly, and this is, remember the title, documents, expertise, and time. But I deleted the word expertise just for melody sake. Documents allow the planning of coordinated actions unfolding in time. That's very difficult to do. If you have 100 people, if you have 100,000 people, it's even more difficult to do. So let's take an orchestra. Here too we have platoons and regiments. We have a commanding officer who is the conductor. And the various members of the orchestra follow instructions. So when they join up, they sign pieces of paper which obligate them to follow the instructions. But the instructions are distributed in a very interesting way by meshed diagrammatic documents called musical scores. It's musical scores which communicate the instructions to the players about what to do next. And the musical scores are meshed. So you have the orchestral score, and then you have the individual scores for the violins and the violas and so forth. So this is how to do things with diagrams. You couldn't create a musical work without scores, just as you couldn't create a large-scale military campaign without written orders. You couldn't rehearse without scores. You couldn't tell people that they're playing wrongly without scores. This has something to do with the private music argument. Music could not be performed without both scores and rehearsal. So in principle, if you rehearse often enough, if you drill your players, the actual performance can be without a score, but you couldn't rehearse without a score. All right, so that is so. This is the final element which Shapiro also leaves out. How do documents hold together these horizontally and vertically and diachronically, temporally meshed hierarchies? The answer is drill, preferably with a stick. So, documents, including documents with diagrams, are inert, so they don't speak to you all by themselves. They only have some kind of animating power if the users have expertise. How do they get to have expertise? Through training. So that's why musicians train so much. That's why they drill so much. That's why they have so many rehearsals, because they need to become experts in interpreting the documents. So the modular, so we have the modularity, which is presupposed by the horizontal and vertical meshing. Each module has its own coordinated mode of action, which has been drilled into the agents through training. So this is shared practice. Coordinated activity rests upon shared practice, which rests upon expertise, which can be acquired only through drill. Drill in how to execute diagrams. Now the army uses big diagrams. This is a map table, and some of them are just sand tables. And these symbols which you see here, some of which are three-dimensional, are all military symbology. They all have a quite specific meaning. And this is the U.S. Military Operations Center in Afghanistan. The maps along the wall, and then the other screens up there are replicated, but also are enhanced by smaller maps and images on the screens of the people in the hall. Now, so what we're dealing with here is e-documents with e-diagrams. So everything I've said about documents so far can be said even more interestingly or even more complicatedly, by taking account of the fact that many diagrams today are executable. Now, so we have intelligence in the top left-hand corner, we have fire support, we have targeting, we have logistics. All of these people are modules dealing with different aspects of planning and commanding activities on the side of other modules who are actually on the ground, either at home where they're packing the supplies and shipping them, or in the field. So this is a military plan, including all the symbols. This is more military symbology. These are targets. Ontologically, very interesting problem. What is a target? And I'll give you a clue. It's not a latitude-longitude measurement. This is a fragment of the D-Day invasion plan. And now the final point I want to make is that these symbols exist as part of a drill mechanism, which the military, all the military, not just the army, has developed over hundreds of years in a very, very fine-tuned way. So they have created training modules, army field manuals, which are made of text full of diagrams, which are designed to create the necessary expertise on behalf of each unit, with each kind of expertise needed to perform each kind of subplan within the nested collection of plans, which are typical of any given engagement. Of course, once you get into the field, all the expertise that you've acquired through drilling will need to be subtly and often violently upset by what goes on in the field. But because everybody's been drilled, they all know how each other will react to those upsets. So what this means is that they will be able to read and follow orders and read the battlefield in the same way, because they've been drilled to read those things using the same military doctrine. This is the joint doctrine hierarchy. So at the top you have joint doctrine number 1, which is the ontology. That gives you the terms and all the definitions. Then you have in the middle joint operations, and then you have things like information operations, air mobility operations, joint land operations, and so forth on the top level. And then as you go down, you have Army special operations, you have joint special operations, you have Air Force special operations. So there's a hierarchy. Each doctrine at the higher level is used for the more specific doctrines on the lower level. So training is created in such a way as to guarantee horizontal coordination, meshing of the activities of the modules at the more specialist levels down below. And most of this is words. Books, actually. These are manuals. Read them. But some of them are full of pictures. And these pictures are used to motivate exercises, which go on over and over again. Now, I think I'm probably going to stop there. I've probably said enough.